The first thing I felt was heat, not embarrassment, not shock, heat. My mother's voice cut across the terrace of the Sapphire Hotel, sharp enough to turn heads. "You selfish trash," she screamed. I barely had time to register the ceramic pot tilting in her hand before the liquid hit me. Freshly brewed coffee poured over my scalp, searing my skin, flooding down my neck, soaking into my worn gray hoodie. The pain was instant, white, blinding, violent. It stole the air from my lungs and sent a shock straight down my spine. But the pain wasn't the worst part. The sound that followed was laughter. Not nervous laughter, not disbelief, amusement. My brother Christopher and my sister Amanda already had their phones raised, recording. Tiny red lights blinked back at me like predators' eyes. They weren't helping. They weren't shocked. They were documenting. I sat there, coffee dripping from my eyelashes, skin burning, clothes soaked, and understood something with brutal clarity. This wasn't a bridge burned, it was annihilated. I stood up. I didn't wipe my face. I didn't look at my mother, who was now breathing hard, chest heaving with the satisfaction of her rage. I walked, straight through the terrace, my boots striking marble in a steady rhythm that felt louder than any scream I could have made. Inside the hotel bathroom, I locked the door and leaned over the sink. My reflection stared back at me, hair matted dark, skin along my hairline blistering into an angry red. A thin tremor ran through my hands, not fear, not weakness, but adrenaline fighting for control. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm back out there and flip the table, shatter their expensive dishes, expose every fragile ego sitting behind those phones. I wanted them to feel even a fraction of what burned across my skin. Then I looked at my eyes. They weren't wet. They were cold. And that's when I understood the trap. If I screamed, I gave them content. If I cried, I gave them satisfaction. My family thrived on chaos, on reaction, on spectacle. My mother fed on control and appearances. My siblings fed on attention like oxygen. They didn't want resolution. They wanted proof that I still cared enough to engage. Silence, on the other hand, is a mirror. When you don't scream back at a monster, it's forced to hear its own voice echo. And monsters hate that. I dabbed my neck with paper towels, hissing through my teeth as the skin protested. I kept my expression neutral. No tears, no shaking, no performance. I walked back out onto the terrace. The table had gone quiet. Christopher still smirked, phone raised. Amanda's fingers flew across her screen, already crafting the narrative. My mother stood with her arms crossed, waiting for the apology she believed she was owed. I didn't sit. I reached into my soaked hoodie, pulled out my wallet, and removed 4 $20 bills. $80, my share of the breakfast I hadn't eaten. I placed the bills on the white tablecloth beside the empty coffee pot and smoothed them flat, perfectly aligned. Then I turned and walked away. "That's right," Christopher called after me. "Run away, go cry in your truck." I didn't look back. The silence I left behind weighed more than any scream ever could. It sounded like a door closing, locking, being welded shut. They thought they'd won because they held the camera. They didn't realize they'd just filmed their own downfall. I climbed into my 10-year-old Subaru, the smell of burnt coffee filling the cab. My hands shook as I started the engine, not from fear but from the crash after adrenaline. I pulled out of the hotel lot and onto the highway, putting distance between myself and the people who shared my DNA. The argument had started over something so banal it was almost insulting. Money. Christopher had cornered me before the food arrived. "I need $50,000, he said, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. "An investment. Inventory's tight, just a bridge loan." He leaned in. "You can put it on a credit card, you've got good credit, right?" He thought I was broke. He thought I was a struggling freelance coder living in a cabin because I couldn't afford the city. He didn't know I'd sold my AI safety company 3 weeks earlier. He didn't know my net worth had quietly crossed into 9 figures. And he definitely didn't know that the moment he asked, he'd already lost. When I refused, calmly, politely, the mask cracked. "You're selfish," he sneered. "Mom pays for everything for us and you can't even help." That was the trigger, not desperation, entitlement. My family lived a life of paper wealth, leased cars, borrowed condos, designer labels bought, worn once and returned, liabilities dressed up as assets. They owned debt and appearances. I owned my truck, my cabin, my code. And as of 3 weeks ago, something far more dangerous to them, freedom. They hated me not because I was poor, but because they sensed I wasn't trapped, and people drowning in obligation despise anyone standing on solid ground. As I drove toward urgent care, my scalp throbbing, my mind shifted gears. The emotional part of me wanted to grieve the mother I never had. The CEO part of me was already drafting a police report. They wanted to teach me my place in the family. They were about to learn my place in the world. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was a hostile takeover. And I had never lost a negotiation. Urgent care smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. A nurse guided me into a small exam room, her eyes flicking briefly to my scalp before she schooled her expression into neutrality. Professionals are good at that. They learn not to react, not to ask questions until the patient is ready. Cold water stung as she gently rinsed my hair. Burn spray hissed against raw skin. I clenched my jaw and focused on breathing evenly. Second-degree burns, she said. Not catastrophic, not nothing. I nodded. Pain, I could manage. I'd been managing pain my entire life. What lingered wasn't the burn, it was the certainty, the kind that settles in your bones and doesn't leave room for denial anymore. They hadn't lost control, they'd revealed it. Back in my cabin that night, the quiet felt surgical. No city noise, no neighbors, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft crackle of pine as the temperature dropped outside. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied the damage. A blister had formed behind my left ear. The skin along my hairline looked raw, almost unreal. I didn't cover it. I wanted to see it clearly. I wanted to remember exactly what refusing $50,000 looked like. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again and again. I ignored it until the vibration turned into a steady pulse against the counter. When I finally picked it up, it wasn't an apology. It was a notification. I'd been tagged on an old social media account I barely used anymore. Christopher's face filled the screen, filtered, smug, cropped perfectly for maximum effect. The video played automatically. There I was, sitting at the terrace table, shoulders hunched, coffee dripping from my chin as my mother screamed. The sound was distorted but clear enough to catch her words. Selfish trash. The caption was already doing its work. When your broke sister tries to ruin brunch, taking out the trash. I scrolled. The comments were exactly what he'd wanted. She looks pathetic. Serves her right. Probably begged for money. Amanda had shared it to her own account with a laughing emoji. Karma is served hot. I set the phone down gently. They were celebrating. High on attention, on validation, on the cheap thrill of a crowd agreeing with them. They thought this was the end of the story. The moment where the weak one is publicly humiliated and quietly disappears. They didn't understand one crucial thing. On the internet, context is currency, and markets correct violently. I didn't report the video. I didn't comment. I took screenshots. The post, the caption, the timestamps. I saved everything to an encrypted folder labeled evidence. Then I made tea, not coffee, never coffee again. I sat by the window, steam rising from the mug, and let the algorithm do what it always does when given time, find the truth. By Monday morning, the air felt different, heavy, charged, like pressure dropping before a storm. I was in my home office, a converted bedroom overlooking the valley, reviewing architecture for a new neural network model when my personal phone rang. Elena, my head of public relations. Emma, she said without preamble, her voice tight. Have you seen Twitter? I've seen TikTok, I replied calmly, fingers still on the keyboard. It breached containment, she said. Tech Twitter picked it up about an hour ago. A former intern recognized you. I stopped typing. They know, Elena continued. They know you founded SafeMind. They know about the DeepMind acquisition. Views are at 4 million and climbing fast. I pulled up Twitter on my second monitor. The top post stopped me cold. A side-by-side image. On the left, me on the cover of a tech magazine, composed, professional, unflinching. On the right, a blurry screenshot from Christopher's video. Coffee-soaked, head bowed. The caption read, "This family assaulted one of the most influential women in AI because she wouldn't loan them 50K. They had no idea she's worth 9 figures. The comments were no longer laughing. They were furious. Someone recognized my mother. That's Angela Mercer. She sits on the Arts Council board. Another user dug deeper. The brother sells luxury watches on commission. The math isn't mathing. Screenshots multiplied. Threads unraveled. Context spread. The narrative flipped. I wasn't the broke sister anymore. I was the woman who said no and got burned for it, literally. Elena's voice cut back in. We can issue a takedown, harassment policy violation, 10 minutes and it's gone. No, I said. There was a pause. No, she repeated. It's humiliating, Elena added carefully. It's not humiliating for me, I said evenly. It's illuminating. I leaned back in my chair. Leave it up. Silence on the line. Let them see exactly who these people are. I ended the call. The retweet counter spun like a slot machine. They had wanted attention. They just hadn't expected the audience. This was the difference between amateur cruelty and professional consequence. They filmed a moment. I owned the context. And context, once released, doesn't belong to anyone anymore. By Tuesday morning, the story no longer belonged to my family. It belonged to the public. The video had escaped the bubble Christopher and Amanda thought they controlled. It wasn't just viral anymore. It was dissected. Context layered on context. Screenshots paired with timelines. Old interviews resurfaced. Articles linked. Names connected. The internet did what it always does when it smells hypocrisy. It dug. I watched it unfold from the quiet of my cabin, monitors glowing softly in the early light. Snow dusted the tree line outside, indifferent to reputations and rage. Inside, the narrative was accelerating faster than any PR team could contain. Christopher's comments were locked by noon. Amanda deleted 3 posts before giving up entirely. My mother's name trended for reasons she had never curated. They were used to admiration without scrutiny. This was scrutiny without mercy. My phone rang again. Elena. This has crossed into institutional territory, she said. Boards are asking questions. Sponsors are pulling back. There's chatter about formal complaints. Good, I replied. She hesitated. Emma, are you okay? I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. The burn was healing, the skin tight and pink, a visible reminder that this wasn't theoretical. I'm fine, I said. Never been clearer. That was the truth. Clarity is dangerous when you finally stop doubting yourself. Christopher didn't call me, not at first. Narcissists don't apologize when they're exposed. They pivot. They escalate. They rewrite reality until they're the victim of a misunderstanding they created. By the afternoon, he posted a video of his own. No filters this time. No jokes, just indignation. This has been taken out of context, he said, jaw tight, eyes darting. It was a family joke. She knows how our mom is. People are trying to cancel us over nothing. Nothing. The comments were brutal. Nothing is assault. Jokes don't cause burns. Why were you filming? The ratio was catastrophic. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because while Christopher was trying to talk his way out of the fire, I was already moving on a different axis entirely. That afternoon, I made one call, not to a lawyer, to my chief investment officer. Remember the watch group we flagged last quarter? I asked casually. There was a pause as he pulled it up. The holding company with the regional franchises? That's the one, I said. I want the controlling stake. Another pause. That's not a problem, he said carefully, but may I ask why? You'll see, I replied, and that was that. Power doesn't announce itself. It just shows up when needed. By evening, the deal was already in motion. Quiet, clean, paperwork routed through entities Christopher would never think to look at. To him, ownership was a concept. To me, it was infrastructure. I slept well that night. For the first time since the terrace, I slept deeply. Without replaying voices, without imagining alternate endings, I had stepped out of the emotional arena and into the only one that ever actually mattered. Tuesday night, my phone finally rang with a number I recognized. My mother. I let it ring. She called again and again. On the 4th attempt, she left a voicemail. Her voice was different now, thinner, strained. Emma, this has gone too far, she said. You need to fix this. You're humiliating us. People are saying terrible things. This isn't how family handles problems. I listened to the message. Once, then deleted it. Family had handled problems their way for decades. This was just the first time they didn't like the outcome. The next morning, Christopher walked into his showroom expecting another day of damage control. What he didn't know was that the ground beneath him had already shifted. He straightened his cuffs, smoothed his jacket, probably checked his phone for updates. Likes, messages, reassurance that the world still worked the way he believed it did. A manager approached him, holding a tablet. Corporate wants a meeting, she said, now. Christopher smiled. He always did when he thought something important was about to happen. He had no idea it already had. Christopher walked into the showroom with the confidence of a man who still believed the world bent around him. Timeless luxury gleamed the way it always had. Glass cases polished to mirror shine, spotlights catching diamonds and brushed steel. The illusion of permanence, of wealth, of control. He adjusted his cuffs, glanced at his reflection in a display case, and smiled at no one in particular. The manager approached with an iPad held tight against her chest. "Corporate wants a Zoom," she said. "Right now." Christopher didn't look worried. If anything, he looked relieved. He probably thought this was damage control, a warning, maybe even reassurance. He stepped into the office, closed the door, and took a seat. The screen flickered to life. Two familiar faces appeared first, the regional director and a representative from HR. Both were expressionless, clipped, professional. No small talk, no easing in. Then a third window appeared. Black screen, no name, just a label, ownership. Christopher frowned. "Good morning," the regional director said. "This meeting is being recorded." Christopher chuckled lightly. "I figured, look, before we get into it—" "Stop," the HR representative said flatly. "Silence. We've received thousands of formal complaints regarding a video you posted," she continued. "The content depicts assault, harassment, and conduct damaging to the brand." Christopher's smile faltered. "It was a private family matter," he said quickly. "A joke. People online are blowing it out of proportion." "There is nothing private about 4 million views," the director replied, "and there is nothing humorous about assault." Christopher leaned forward. "You can't fire me over something like this. I didn't do anything. That was when I unmuted my microphone. I kept the camera off. My brother," I said calmly, my voice filling the room through the speakers. "You didn't think this through." The color drained from his face. "Emma?" he whispered. "Yes," I said, "your sister." The HR representative glanced at the director. Neither looked surprised. "You see," I continued, "your employment contract has a morality clause, a strict one, and the holding company that owns your franchise takes those clauses very seriously." Christopher swallowed hard. "You don't get to do this." "I do," I replied, "because as of yesterday, I'm the majority shareholder of the parent company that signs your paychecks." The silence was absolute, suffocating, the kind that crushes denial. The director cleared his throat. "Christopher Mercer, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Please leave all company property, including any demo inventory." Christopher stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. "You can't afford this," I added, still calm, "so leave the watch." I ended the call, one down. They came to my gate 2 days later. It was inevitable. When people like my mother lose control, they don't reflect. They attack. It's called narcissistic collapse, the moment the facade cracks and all that's left is rage. I watched them through the security monitors in my kitchen. Angela's leased luxury sedan idled aggressively at the iron gates of my property. 20 acres of woodland surrounded a modern glass house invisible from the road. I'd purchased it through an LLC months earlier. They must have hired a private investigator to find it. Angela leaned on the intercom button, her face distorted by the wide-angle lens. "Open this gate," she screamed. "You tricked us, you lied to us." Christopher paced behind her, kicking gravel like a caged animal. "You owe us," he shouted into the camera. "You owe me my job." I pressed the talk button. "You are trespassing," I said evenly. "Leave immediately." "Trespassing?" Angela shrieked. "I am your mother." "You're not," I replied. "You're the woman who poured boiling coffee on me." Her mouth opened, then closed. "You embarrassed us," she continued desperately. "You humiliated us globally. We're going to sue you." "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation," I said, "and the video you filmed is the evidence." I glanced at the second monitor. A black SUV was already pulling up behind them, lights flashing silently. "I also have a restraining order pending," I added. "The officers arriving behind you are here to enforce it." The color drained from Angela's face. Christopher froze. Blue lights reflected off the sedan's polished paint. "Goodbye," I said. I cut the feed. The silence that followed was expensive. It was triple-pane glass, high-end HVAC, absolute safety, and it was mine. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It rolled in slowly, then all at the same time, like a structure failing under weight it had been carrying for years. By the end of the week, Christopher's name was radioactive. The video was the first result on every search engine, stitched permanently to his identity. No employer wanted to explain that to clients. No luxury brand wanted their products associated with a man who laughed while someone was burned. His watch career didn't end dramatically. It evaporated. Amanda lasted a little longer. Influencers always do. She tried to pivot, posted vague quotes about toxic narratives and being misunderstood. She deleted comments. Then sponsors started disappearing. Brands don't like controversy when it's not profitable, and they don't like assault under any circumstances. Her inbox went quiet. Angela retreated completely, the woman who once curated every appearance, every social function, every whisper of her reputation stopped leaving the house. Board positions quietly reassigned, invitations mysteriously lost in the mail. Friends who had laughed beside her at brunch suddenly remembered other commitments. Shame doesn't destroy narcissists. Irrelevance does. I watched none of it in real time. That was intentional. I spent those days doing ordinary things, walking my dog, reviewing contracts, cooking meals slowly, letting my nervous system recalibrate now that it wasn't bracing for impact. Power doesn't feel like adrenaline. It feels like quiet. The restraining order was finalized without contest. There was no courtroom drama, no confrontation, just paperwork, signatures, and legal distance turned permanent. The irony didn't escape me. For years they'd demanded closeness on their terms. Now they weren't allowed within 500 feet of me. 2 weeks later my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. "Emma," a man said gently, "this is Rose Mercer's attorney." I closed my eyes. My grandmother had always been different, quieter, observant. She never intervened, but she always noticed. "She asked me to call you immediately," the lawyer continued. "She's made changes to her estate." "I don't need anything," I said reflexively. There was a pause. "She knows," he replied. "That's why she did it." He explained that the trust, the properties, the investments, all of it, had been rewritten, transferred entirely to me. "Her words," he added softly, "were that you're the only one who never needed it, and that's exactly why you deserve it." I thanked him. Then I sat in silence for a long time, not from shock, from release. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt lighter, like I had finally put down a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying since childhood. Their expectations, their entitlement, their noise, all gone. That evening I opened the family group chat, dozens of unread messages, rage, bargaining, blame disguised as confusion. I didn't read them. I pressed delete group. Then I whistled for my dog, grabbed my keys, and climbed into my truck. As I pulled onto the road, the rearview mirror showed nothing behind me, and the road ahead was entirely mine. The world didn't end when I walked away. That was the strangest part. No lightning strike, no dramatic reckoning, no moment where the universe paused to acknowledge what had happened. The road simply stretched forward, empty and open, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it all along. I drove for hours that night, not because I was running, but because I could. The cabin lights faded behind me, replaced by darkness and the steady hum of tires against asphalt. My dog slept in the passenger seat, unbothered, trusting completely. I envied that kind of certainty once. Now I finally understood it. Safety isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It's the absence of threat. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. Neutrality. No incoming chaos. No emotional landmines. No sudden demands disguised as family concern. My phone became a tool again instead of a warning system. I worked. I built. I invested. I mentored quietly, deliberately, choosing people who didn't mistake access for entitlement. I took meetings where my voice wasn't interrupted. I walked away from conversations that tried to repackage control as care. And slowly, something inside me healed in places I didn't know were wounded. The burn on my scalp faded, the skin smoothed. The pain became memory. But the lesson stayed. I thought for a while that the confrontation on the terrace was the breaking point. I was wrong. That was just the exposure. The real ending came later, in the silence. Silence is where you find out who you are when no one is demanding anything from you, when you're no longer performing resilience for an audience that benefits from it. In that silence, I realized something simple and devastatingly clear. They never wanted me weak. They wanted me available. And the moment I became unavailable, everything they built around that expectation collapsed. I never spoke to my mother again, not out of anger, out of clarity. Some relationships don't end with screaming matches or final words. They end with understanding, when you finally see the pattern clearly enough to step out of it. My siblings tried once more, through intermediaries, through lawyers, through distant relatives who suddenly remembered my name. I declined, not because I needed to prove anything, but because peace is not something you negotiate. On a quiet morning months later, I stood on the deck of my cabin, coffee-free, watching sunlight filter through the trees. My dog sat beside me, tail thumping lazily against the wood. I felt grounded, not powerful in the way movies depict it, powerful in the way that lasts. I didn't win. I exited, and that made all the difference. If there's anything this story is about, it isn't revenge, it's consent, who you give access to, who you give energy to, who you allow to define your worth. Walking away doesn't mean you lost. Sometimes it means you finally chose yourself. I closed the door, not with a slam, with certainty, and I never looked back.